Good morning. Our keynote speaker comes to us today with over 20 years of experience in educational administration. He is the founder and CEO of 4 schools in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It is virtually impossible to describe the academic and personal successes that the students have experienced at Harvest Preparatory, Best Academy, and Sister Academy. Mr. Mahmoud has literally changed the lives of thousands of our school children. Recently, he was recognized for his outstanding achievement and was inducted into the National Charter School Hall of Fame. As a consultant, it is a gift to be able to work with an educator full of such integrity, intelligence, and passion. He is one of the smartest and hardest working people I know. Please help me with a warm welcome to an amazing educator, a great man, and a dear friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Eric Mahmoud.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Blakely for that generous introduction. I also want to thank Brian Wickman and Amy Johnston and Zig Engelman and Dr. Kurt Engelman for inviting me to present here at this conference. They say that the greatest form of flattery as a speaker is when they invite you back. It was about 15 years ago when I spoke here, and so I was invited back. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share the incredible things that have happened at our school over the last 15 years since I've been here. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the seed that produced the seed, my wife, Dr. Ella Mahmoud, who actually is the founder of Seed Academy Harvest Preparatory School. Can we give her a warm... If I didn't recognize her, I may have to sleep in the hallway. I want to make sure I got that right. But it has been an incredible experience over the past 25 years, and in the past 15 years since I've been here, a lot has happened that has really changed the trajectory of our school in general and our children in particular. I've had actually some life-changing experiences in that period of time. In 2005, I was rushed to the hospital because my appendix had ruptured. And when they cut me open and started doing some exploratory surgery, they found that I had a cancerous tumor on my small intestines. And I remember sitting in the hospital, laying in the hospital bed, and I had determined at that point that life is short, and it was clear that I wanted to do something significant for our children. I just didn't want to be the best of the worst. We were actually the best of the worst in our area in North Minneapolis. I'll talk a little bit about that. I really wanted to be the best of the best for our children, and so that took us on a whole different pathway since 2005. We're in North Minneapolis, which is probably one of the most challenging communities in the United States, and actually there's a dysfunctional educational system that breeds crime, poverty, and violence, and retards the development of our children. And so as I talk about our success, I want to give it in the context of North Minneapolis, where we actually have 4 of our schools. Then I'll talk about the theory and the idea that undergirds that success, and I'm going to try to be done in a very short period of time because Brian gave me a pretty hard stop for 30 minutes. So North Minneapolis, highest crime rate in Minnesota, right in North Minneapolis. 70% of the families headed by single— widest racial employment gap in the country. 50% of the schools are the lowest performing schools in Minnesota. 68% of the families in North Minneapolis are on some government assistance. Minnesota has the widest graduation gap in the country. So this is the context in which we do our work at Seed Academy, Harvest Preparatory School, Best Academy, Sister Academy, and now Mastery Schools, which I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Looking at those statistics, you would think it would be almost impossible to get our children to high levels of academic achievement. I'm going to share with you, not only is it possible, it's doable every single day, and our staff are doing it every single day. So this graph is a graph of our 2012 achievement scores. In the black is Harvest Preparatory School. Harvest Preparatory School is kindergarten through 6th grade. We test 3rd through 6th grade. You can see that Harvest Preparatory School outperformed the state average, 65%, 81% versus 65% of the state, and 33% is the state average for African American students. In reading, 79% of our students were proficient in reading, 77% of the students in the state were proficient in reading, and 55% of African American students were proficient. This is trend data over the past 4 years. The yellow is the state, the blue is Minneapolis Public Schools, and what's significant, the gray line is the school right across the street from Harvest Preparatory School. One of the things that I point out, this graph shows that our students, it's not a hardware problem, has nothing to do with our children's capacity to learn. It's a software problem, has everything to do with the program that we're giving them. Either we can program our students for success or we can program them for failure. This is our Best Academy. Let me just give you some context. Best Academy is a program that we actually started about 6 years ago. We began to look at the performance of our boys versus our girls and found that the only thing that our boys were beating our girls in were suspensions. And so we decided that we were going to create a program that was going to create and support the needs of our boys. So we have an all-boys program, we have an all-girls program that's in this data, and I'll show you some disaggregated data in a minute. And then we have, about 3 years ago, we have a growing Somali community in our area. So many of those students are English language learners. So all of that data is grouped in this data. So if you were to look at this on our website, you would see this data. So 75% of our students this year were proficient in math. The state average was 65%. We were slightly below the state average in reading at 73%. This is what I would consider very significant. As I said, about 6 years ago, we decided that we were going to start an all-boys program. Our boys were not just beating our girls in suspensions. They were at least 1 or 2 grade levels behind as we compared them to the girls. After doing some additional research, we found that this was not just a problem at our school, not just a problem in Minneapolis, it was a problem around the country. African American boys are probably at the lowest in any academic measure, whether it's 3rd grade reading and math scores to graduation rates. We have the highest concentration of African American boys in any institution in Minnesota at our 4 schools. The only institution that's competing for more African American boys is the prison system. And what we have done with these African American boys, and this is last year's data, what we have done with these African American boys is absolutely amazing. I actually disaggregated the state average and got the state white average, and so 81% of the students, the state white students, were proficient in reading last year. Our boys, 85% of our boys were proficient in reading. In math, 80%. And as a matter of fact, this class, 100% of our 8th grade African American boys were proficient in reading last year, and 100% of our 3rd grade boys were proficient in math. I think it was Frederick Douglass that says it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And so our work is really about building strong children so that we can put the prison system out of business. Let me talk quickly about the theory that undergirds the work that we are doing over the past 3 to 4 years. Some of it, Mr. Engelman, I'll actually skip over because he's actually done a great job in laying out the foundation, so there's no need for me to go over that. There's what I consider 5 gaps that make up the achievement gap. First, we have the preparation gap. Then we have the time gap. There's the teaching gap, the leadership gap, and I believe the widest gap of them all, and Mr. Engelman talked about that, is the belief gap. In talking about the time gap, one researcher at the University of Minnesota says that close to half of the achievement gap is present before children even enter school. Many of you are familiar with the book Meaningful Differences by Betty Hart and Todd Risley, and they talked about in that book where they looked at three-year-olds even before they started school, the difference between the language skills of the low-income children and the upper-income children. There was a 700-word gap even before they started school. Some of the reasons for the gap is parenting. Basically, parents, the difference in the amount of communication between the parent and the children, child health, the mother's breastfeeding, maternal mental state, the quality of the preschool. Now, in the previous film, you saw Mr. Engelman working with 3- and 4-year-olds. The quality of the preschool makes a difference. And then low birth weight. So how do we overcome some of those challenges? Systematic instruction. Direct instruction over the last 18 years has been the foundation of the work that we do at Harvest Preparatory School and Best Academy. Monitoring student progress, varying the time and support that our students need. We know that some students, when we instruct them, they're going to get it in 1 repetition. Another student, it may take 100 repetitions. We need to give our children the time and support they need to be successful. This is the result of the work that we've been doing over the years. Best Academy with English language learners. This is 3rd grade achievement data. We have 87% of our students were proficient last year, 81% at Harvest. The state average was 80% for 3rd grade, and again, the school right next door, 40%. So let me talk about the time gap. I believe that for students that are behind, time is their greatest enemy. And what we need to do is to be able to bend time to favor our students. There's a study by the Mid-Atlantic Research and Evaluation Laboratory that said there's about 200 standards, kindergarten through 12th grade. There's about 3,000 benchmarks within those standards, requiring about 15,000 hours of instruction. So if in a typical school day, which is about 6 hours, really there's only about 13 hours available, 13,000 hours available for instruction in a 6-hour school day. So even if you use all of the instructional time, you wouldn't have enough time to cover all the standards. There's another piece of work by Learning 24/7, where they looked at 2,000 classrooms all over the country, and they found that only 21 to 69% of classroom time was used for instruction. So at 69%, you don't have enough time. And clearly at 21%, you don't have nearly enough time. So there's not enough time in our 6-hour school day and the 182 days per year to cover all of the instruction that our children need to be successful with the standards. Now, my next slide was going to talk about the summer slide, but since Mr. Engelman talked about that being a myth, I'm going to just go right past that.
Let's look.
I'm not going to argue with Mr. Engelman in his house. So some of the strategies to address the time gap. Number one, more time in school. So longer school day, longer school year. Increased time on task. And in business, time is money. In education, time is justice. And so we need to give our children the time that they need to be successful. The teaching gap. There's no factor more important than an effective teacher. As Mr. Engelman said, that you can have a great bike and not an effective rider, and you're not going to be successful. So we need effective teachers. Teacher effects dwarf all other factors on student learning. One of the most powerful things that has happened over the past 3 years is really boiling teaching down to 5 important questions. And this is what we our teachers ask ourselves at the beginning of the year and throughout the year. What do my children need to know and be able to do? So it's beginning with the end in mind. Secondly, what are the most effective ways of teaching what they need to know? How do I know that they got it? That's a question of assessment. And then if they don't get it, then what do we do? And then what if we're dealing with children that come in at a 5th grade level but are reading and doing math at a 7th, 8th grade level? What do we do with those students? Those are the basic 5 questions that all of our teachers ask. Spend some time talking about the leadership gap. Leadership's primary responsibility is to ensure the coherence of the systems, structures, the culture, and the personnel all points towards student achievement. So how do we build an effective educational system? This is what I call our educational slingshot. As David had a slingshot to slay Goliath, this is our slingshot to slay the achievement gap. And I won't go into details, but it has student achievement at the center. Then it has that whole cycle of planning, teaching, assessment, and reflection. The yellow circle is dealing with instructional leadership, giving our teachers feedback and looking at data. And then the outer ring deals with the calendar. That has to be aligned. The school culture and the operations all support student achievement. And as a school leader, I want to make sure that all the arrows are pointing in the same direction. So let me talk briefly about the belief gap, which again, I believe is the widest gap of all achievement. Dr. Harold Stevenson, in his book, The Learning Gap, in the late 80s, looked at Asian education and American education and said that, that Asian education, or the best American schools, were actually worse than the worst Asian schools. Had nothing to do with genetics, had everything to do with culture. He did a survey. He asked, if you had the choice between two ingredients, hard work or innate ability, what is the most important ingredient for success? He asked that of the American students. The American students said innate ability is the most important ingredient for success. Asked the Asian students the same question. They said hard work was the most important ingredient for success. So in the American culture, if you got it, you got it. If you don't, you don't. In the Asian culture, all I have to do is work for it and I'll get it. It's tied to Mr. Engelman's Rule 2 that says, if I want to promote the self-fulfilling prophecy, if I keep working at it, I'll get it. That's the type of idea that we want to instill in our children. And for African American children to take on, or any minority children to take on this idea of innate ability, is undermining to their performance, because the stereotype that African American children and other minority children don't have the capacity to learn. So we want to give them this philosophy that hard work leads to success, and we instill that in our children on a regular basis.
Amen.
Some of you are familiar with the work of Carol Dweck. She wrote 2 books, Self-Theories and also Mindset. And in her book, Self-Theory, she talks about experiments with African American students in particular, teaching them about the growth mindset. Then these same students would then teach younger children, and they were able to not only change their mindset, but also change their academic performance. And we see that at our school. By changing our children's mindsets, we're able to change their academic performance and literally change the lives of our children. We had a young lady that came to our school as a 5th grader, and she was a hard-working young lady. She was behind 2 and 3 grade levels when she entered our school. And one day in March, her mother took her to the bus, as she did every day, and unfortunately, that was the last time she saw her mother. Her mother had passed during the day. Took her to the house after we heard of the bad news. Actually, my wife took her to the house. Of course, when the young lady heard about how her mother had passed, she was hysterical. The only thing that young lady, after she had kind of gotten over it, after about 15, 20 minutes, her next question was, who's going to take me to school now for tutorial? We had no school the next day, but we had tutoring. She wanted to go to school anyway to get additional tutoring. One of the teachers asked the next day when she came to school, the teacher said, well, is there anything that I can do for you? She said, well, Miss Lutz, the only thing that you can do for me is to help me pass this MCA. The MCA was coming up in about a month. Now, she's in 5th grade, never passed the MCA, and that's our state test. After 30 days of hard work, she passed the MCA. And that was based on the mindset that she could do it. In 1954, there was a man by the name of Roger Bannister. And some of you may have heard of Roger Bannister. Roger Bannister was a distance runner, and he was the first person to break the 4-minute mile, to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. What's significant about that story is not only after Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, within a year, 30 other runners broke the 4-minute mile. We're trying to create a Bannister effect in North Minneapolis. We're trying to shatter these ideas of low expectations, not only with the children, but also with the adults that are working with our children. Let me just summarize that the 5 gaps has really been the lever to our theory of change over the past few years. And I just want to end with a quick video. I believe that sports is a metaphor for life. My football coach used to say, if you can play the game of football, you can play the game of life. Because football and sports in general is about winning and losing, and most importantly, getting up each and every time you fall. So I want to play a quick video because I think it's directly applicable to the work that we do as educators. It's a little grainy video, but read the words. That's okay, I cried too when I first saw it. A couple of times. Every time I see it, I cry. But what's significant about that, somebody had to train Derek Redmond. Somebody had to give Derek Redmond the skills he needed to get in the race. Our children are in the race of life. Not only do we have to give them the skills, we have to give them the confidence to compete. Not only do we have to give them the confidence to compete, we have to give them the grit so that each and every time they fall, they get back up. And then most importantly, when our children fall, who's going to be there to pick them up and get them back in the race? That's the work as educators. Thank you very much.
Talk about hitting that out of the park. So that pretty much ends our opening festivities. I did want to point out that we have a photographer that's going around here at the conference. You may have seen him. He's a great guy, very personable, Clayton. And he asked me to tell you that if you do see him taking pictures, if you just turn and smile a little bit at the camera, that'll help out an awful lot. Anyway, we need you all to clear out of the rooms, please. We need to set these up for our sessions. They will begin in 15 minutes. So right now we're looking at 10:02. So really we're pretty much right on schedule for the 10:15 start of your sessions. Have a great conference.